When you learn to be alone, you master your time. This is one of the deepest truths Carl Jung hinted at when he spoke about individuation, the journey of becoming yourself. In this video, we are going to explore why solitude is not emptiness, but power, how learning to sit with yourself transforms the way you live, and why mastering your time begins with mastering your inner space. We will talk about Jung's insights on solitude and self-reflection, the hidden fears people have about being alone, how society distracts us from ourselves, the connection between solitude and creativity, the role of silence in personal growth, and how learning to be alone reshapes relationships with others. We will also dive into practical reflections on what it means to reclaim your time, why solitude is different from loneliness, and how Jung's psychology can help you discover strength, meaning, and clarity in moments when you are by yourself. By the end, you will see that solitude is not a punishment but a gateway to true freedom, and that mastering time is not about schedules or productivity hacks, but about how fully present you are with yourself. So let us begin with the simple but profound idea that the person who fears being alone is never truly free. When we are constantly seeking company, noise, or distraction, it is often because silence confronts us with truths we don't want to face. Jung suggested that most people avoid looking within because they sense that the inner world is vast, strange, and at times terrifying. Being alone strips away the masks we wear for others. Suddenly, there is no audience to impress, no social performance to maintain, no distractions to hide behind. What remains is the raw encounter with the self. This encounter is uncomfortable for many, but Jung believed it is the foundation of growth. Without it, we risk living lives that are borrowed, imitated, or dictated by the collective rather than our true nature. Think about how society is structured. Everywhere you look, there is constant noise. Social media, news, entertainment, endless invitations to be busy. We live in a time when solitude feels abnormal. If someone is sitting alone at a cafe without their phone, people wonder what's wrong with them. Yet Jung would say that solitude is not something to escape from, but something to cultivate. When you learn to enjoy your own company, you stop wasting time on meaningless distractions. You begin to master your time not by controlling every second of your schedule, but by reclaiming the energy you once scattered outward. This is the paradox. Solitude gives you back time because it removes the unnecessary. It teaches you what truly matters. But solitude is often confused with loneliness, and this is where people get trapped. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected, of wanting company and not having it. Solitude, on the other hand, is chosen. It is fullness rather than lack. When you are truly at home with yourself, you can sit in silence and feel complete. Jung understood that solitude is the soil where the self takes root. It is not about avoiding people, but about finding a center that does not collapse when others are absent. To master your time, you must first learn this difference. If you are merely lonely, your time will always be spent searching for someone or something to fill the void. But if you embrace solitude, your time becomes your own, and from that ground, relationships become richer because they are not driven by need but by choice. Carl Jung spoke often of individuation, the process by which a person integrates all the parts of themselves and becomes whole. Solitude is essential in this journey because it creates the space where you can hear the voice of the unconscious. In the crowd, you hear only the collective voice, the trends, the opinions, the judgments of others. In solitude, you begin to hear the whisper of your deeper self. This is where intuition emerges, where dreams speak, where creativity is born. Some of the greatest works of art, philosophy, and science came from people who were unafraid of solitude. They learned to sit with their thoughts long enough for ideas to ripen. Jung himself withdrew into solitude many times in his life, building his retreat by the lake at Ballingen, where he carved symbols in stone and reflected in silence. He knew that the external world is noisy, but the inner world speaks in a quieter language, one that requires patience to understand. Now, why is solitude so closely tied to mastering time? Because time is not just hours on a clock. It is the texture of your life, the rhythm of your days, the quality of your attention. Most people feel they don't have enough time, but what they really lack is presence. They are constantly pulled outward by obligations, by social expectations, by the fear of missing out. When you cannot be alone, you are always at the mercy of what others demand from you. But when you are at ease with yourself, you begin to make conscious choices. You no longer say yes to everything just to avoid being left out. You no longer waste hours on empty conversations that drain your spirit. You start to notice which activities nourish you and which only distract you. In this way, solitude filters your time, like a sieve that keeps the gold and lets the sand slip away. Mastering time is not about speed, but about alignment, doing what resonates with who you really are. Consider how many people live according to borrowed time. They fill their calendars with tasks that do not reflect their own values. They shape their days around what others expect. They even pursue goals that were never truly theirs, chasing status symbols or lifestyles they saw on screens. When such people finally find themselves alone, they panic, because silence reveals the hollowness of what they've been doing. This is why solitude is frightening. It can expose the truth, but this exposure is also liberation. It is in solitude that you can ask yourself the hard questions. Am I living authentically? Is this how I want to spend my limited time? If everything were stripped away, what would still matter to me? Jung believed that confronting these questions is painful but necessary. Only by facing them can you redirect your life toward meaning rather than imitation. Let us also reflect on the modern addiction to distraction. Notice how uncomfortable people become in silence. The moment there is a pause, they reach for their phone. Jung would say this is a symptom of disconnection from the self. The unconscious tries to speak in silence, but we drown it out with noise. To master your time, you must stop running from silence. In silence, your thoughts settle like water in a pond, and the reflection becomes clear. In silence, you realize how much of your time is wasted on things that do not serve you. This realization can be unsettling, but it is the beginning of wisdom. Creativity, too, requires solitude. Jung wrote about the archetypes and the collective unconscious, the deep structures of the psyche that reveal themselves in myths, symbols, and dreams. These images do not appear when you are constantly distracted. They appear when the mind is still, when you are alone and receptive. Think of great writers, painters, or thinkers. Most of them cherished solitude. They understood that the richest conversations sometimes happen within, not without. To master your time is to give space to these inner dialogues. When you stop running from yourself, you find that your inner world is not empty but alive, filled with ideas, feelings, and possibilities waiting to be brought into form. It is also important to see how solitude changes your relationships with others. Paradoxically, when you are comfortable being alone, you become better in company. Why? Because you no longer cling. You no longer treat relationships as a cure for your loneliness. Instead, you relate from a place of wholeness. You give freely rather than out of need. This makes your connections more authentic and less dependent. Jung would say that solitude allows you to individuate, and individuation allows you to meet others as equals rather than as halves seeking completion. In this way, mastering solitude is not selfish. It is the foundation of love that is not desperate, but generous. At this point, you might be asking, how can I practice solitude in a world that never stops? The truth is, solitude is not about disappearing into the mountains for years, though some do. It can begin with small choices, setting aside moments without devices, taking a walk without music in your ears, sitting quietly for 10 minutes each day, simply observing your thoughts. These simple practices begin to strengthen your relationship with yourself. Over time, you may find that you crave these moments because they restore your clarity. You begin to notice how much time is wasted on meaningless chatter, and you start to reclaim those hours for things that matter. Slowly, your time becomes your own, not parceled out to every demand of the world. Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to yourself." Solitude is the antidote, because in solitude you learn to communicate with yourself first. When you can sit quietly and listen inwardly, you discover what is truly important. Then, even when you return to society, you carry that center with you. This is how solitude and time mastery connect. Solitude teaches you to listen to your inner compass, and time mastery is nothing more than living in harmony with that compass. Solitude also teaches us about boundaries, something that Jung often emphasized in his work. Many people waste their time not because they are lazy, but because they have no clear boundaries. They say yes when they want to say no. They allow other people's urgencies to become their priorities. This is often because they fear rejection, or because they haven't learned to stand firmly in themselves. When you practice solitude, you begin to notice the difference between what feels true to you and what feels imposed. You start to recognize when you are living according to your own values and when you are merely reacting to the demands of others. With this awareness, you can set boundaries without guilt. And when you do, you regain vast amounts of time and energy that were once drained by obligations that did not serve your path. Think about how often people fill their days with activities that are not aligned with their deeper selves. They rush from one meeting to another, attend social gatherings they don't enjoy, scroll endlessly through feeds, all because they don't want to face the discomfort of being still. Solitude teaches you to embrace that stillness. At first, it may feel like boredom, but over time, you realize that boredom is simply the space where creativity and clarity are born. Jung knew that the unconscious communicates in symbols and images, and that these often surface in moments of quiet. When you are alone, without distraction, you begin to see patterns in your own behavior. You notice recurring themes in your thoughts, echoes of old wounds, and whispers of dreams you may have forgotten. Solitude turns these fragments into a mirror, and in that mirror, you meet yourself. This meeting with the self can be unsettling. Jung warned that most people fear their unconscious because it contains not only light but also shadow. The shadow is everything you repress or deny in yourself. The anger you don't admit, the desires you are ashamed of, the fears you hide. In the noise of daily life, you can avoid facing these things. But in solitude, they rise to the surface. This is why solitude can feel uncomfortable. Yet this discomfort is also healing, because when you face your shadow, you begin to integrate it. You no longer waste energy pretending to be someone you are not. Instead, you become whole. And wholeness is the key to mastering time, because you stop scattering your energy in endless inner conflicts. The time you once spent fighting yourself is now available for living authentically. Solitude also reconnects you with the natural rhythm of life. Modern society runs on artificial schedules, clocks, deadlines, productivity goals. We measure time in hours and minutes, but this is not how life itself flows. In solitude, especially in nature, you notice a different kind of time. The slow unfolding of a sunrise, the patient growth of a tree, the quiet rhythm of your own breath. Jung himself spent long periods at his retreat in Balingen, where he lived without electricity, cooked on a wood fire, and let the day guide him rather than the clock. He understood that true mastery of time comes when you align with these deeper rhythms, not when you try to squeeze every second for productivity. In solitude, you step outside of mechanical time and into what the Greeks called kairos, the right moment, the meaningful time. This is when creativity flourishes, when insight strikes, when life feels spacious rather than rushed. Another gift of solitude is the ability to hear your inner calling. Jung believed that each person has a unique path, a purpose that arises from the depths of the psyche. But this calling is often drowned out by external noise. Parents, teachers, society, all impose their expectations. If you never spend time alone, you may spend your whole life living out someone else's script. Solitude clears the stage so you can hear your own lines. It is in solitude that you may realize you are in the wrong career, or that your values do not align with the culture around you, or that the life you are chasing is not truly your own. These realizations can be painful, but they also free you. To master your time means to align your hours with your calling, not to squander them in someone else's story. Consider how many people reach the end of their lives regretting the time they wasted. Studies of the dying often reveal the same themes. People regret not living true to themselves, not spending enough time in meaningful ways, not daring to follow their dreams. Solitude, if embraced earlier, can prevent these regrets. Because solitude forces you to confront yourself, it also forces you to clarify your values. Once you know what matters, you stop wasting time on what doesn't. This is perhaps the deepest form of time mastery, not managing your calendar, but managing your soul. If you know what you stand for, you can let go of the rest. Solitude also reveals how much of our fear of being alone is really a fear of mortality. Jung pointed out that people often distract themselves not just from inner truths, but from the awareness of death. To sit alone in silence is to realize that time is finite, that our days are numbered. This realization can be terrifying, but it can also be empowering. When you accept that your time is limited, you begin to use it wisely. You stop postponing what matters. You stop pretending that life is endless. Solitude makes you aware of death, and this awareness makes you value life. In this sense, mastering time is inseparable from confronting mortality. To learn to be alone is to face the truth of your existence, and to live more fully because of it. There is also a spiritual dimension to solitude. Jung was deeply interested in the connection between psychology and spirituality. He believed that the human psyche longs for wholeness, and that this longing often expresses itself in religious or spiritual symbols. In solitude, many people discover a sense of the sacred. They feel connected to something larger than themselves, whether they call it God, the self, or the universe. This experience does not always come in words. Sometimes it is simply a deep peace, a sense of being held by life itself. Jung wrote about the numinous, the feeling of awe and mystery that arises in these moments. To master your time, you must allow space for the numinous. Without it, life feels mechanical and empty. With it, even a single moment can feel eternal. Another way solitude masters your time is by sharpening your attention. When you are constantly with others or always distracted, your attention becomes fragmented. You skim through life, never fully present. In solitude, you begin to focus. You notice the details, the sound of the wind, the texture of your thoughts, the subtle emotions passing through you. This attentiveness spills over into the rest of your life. You start listening more deeply to others. You savor experiences instead of rushing through them. Time feels richer because you are actually there for it. Jung believed that the psyche thrives on depth, not speed. Solitude trains you in depth, and depth transforms how you experience every moment. It is important to remember that solitude is not isolation. Jung warned that withdrawing completely from others can be dangerous. We need relationships, community, and love. But he also warned against losing ourselves in the collective, in the crowd. The balance is what matters. Solitude is the place where you renew yourself, where you clarify your direction. Relationships are where you share that self with the world. If you skip solitude, you risk losing yourself in others. If you skip relationships, you risk becoming cut off and stagnant. The mastery of time, then, includes knowing when to be alone and when to be together and not confusing the two. One of the most practical outcomes of learning solitude is that your decisions become clearer. Many people waste years in indecision, paralyzed by the opinions of others. They ask everyone for advice, they compare themselves endlessly, and in the process, they lose precious time. Solitude cuts through this confusion. When you sit alone long enough, you begin to hear your own voice. You learn to trust it. Decisions may still be difficult, but they no longer drag on endlessly. You act, not out of panic or pressure, but out of alignment. This alone can save you years of wasted time, years that would otherwise be lost in hesitation. Let us also consider the role of solitude in healing. Jung saw therapy as a form of guided solitude, a place where the individual withdraws from the noise of life to face themselves with the help of a guide. In solitude, you can process old wounds, revisit memories, and release emotions that were suppressed. Healing requires time, and solitude gives you that time. Without it, you carry your wounds into every interaction, repeating the same patterns. With it, you begin to break free. Mastering your time, then, is not just about the future. It is about healing the past so that your future is not dictated by it. Finally, solitude changes your sense of identity. When you are always with others, you tend to define yourself by roles: parent, partner, worker, friend. These roles are important, but they are not the whole of you. In solitude, you encounter the deeper self, the part of you that exists beyond roles. Jung called this the self, the archetype of wholeness. To touch this self is to realize that your time is not just about tasks or achievements. It is about becoming who you truly are. And when you align with this deeper self, you no longer fear time running out, because every moment, no matter how ordinary, becomes an expression of your true life. When you begin to experience solitude as a friend rather than a punishment, you notice how differently time begins to flow. Moments that once seemed dull become alive with subtle beauty. A quiet morning no longer feels empty. It feels like an opening, a gift of hours you can shape freely. Jung believed that the psyche requires these open spaces, much like the body requires air. Without them, the mind suffocates under the weight of constant stimulation. Many people speak of burnout as though it is caused only by work, but Jung would suggest that much of burnout comes from never being alone, from never giving the psyche time to regenerate. Solitude restores energy not because it adds more hours to the day, but because it clears away what is unnecessary. This clearing away is an act of courage. It means facing the silence that most of us try to avoid. Silence reveals what has been ignored. It shows you where you are wasting time on things that do not matter, where you are clinging to relationships that no longer nourish you, where you are betraying yourself to keep the peace with others. These revelations are not easy, but they are essential. Without them, time slips away unnoticed, lost to compromises that lead nowhere. Solitude confronts you with the truth that time is not infinite, and that you cannot afford to live it unconsciously. Once you realize this, every day becomes more precious. Think of solitude as a lens that sharpens your perception. In the constant noise of society, everything blurs together. You may think you are living, but often you are merely reacting. Reacting to demands, reacting to stimuli, reacting to expectations. In solitude, the blur resolves. You begin to see the difference between what is yours and what is borrowed, between what is essential and what is trivial. This clarity is a form of mastery. It means that your time is no longer scattered but directed. Instead of chasing after every demand, you begin to choose with intention. This is not about rigid control. It is about alignment. Jung saw individuation as the path to alignment, aligning the conscious and unconscious, aligning who you are with how you live. Solitude is the workshop where this alignment takes place. But let us be honest, solitude is not always pleasant. At times it brings loneliness. At times it brings fear. Jung would say this is part of the process. The unconscious is not only filled with comforting truths, it also holds the shadow. When you are alone, you may feel the weight of past mistakes, regrets, and unresolved conflicts. The temptation is to flee from these feelings by returning to distraction. But if you stay, if you endure the discomfort, you discover that the shadow is not an enemy. It is simply the part of you that has been waiting to be acknowledged. When you face it, you release the energy that was trapped in denial. And when that energy is released, time feels different, more open, more alive, less heavy. Consider how many people spend years running from themselves. They keep busy not because they love what they are doing, but because they fear what will surface in stillness. They overfill their schedules. They rush from one commitment to another. They surround themselves with constant chatter. But busyness is not mastery. It is often a form of avoidance. Jung would remind us that the quality of your life is not measured by how many things you do, but by how deeply you live the time you are given. Solitude teaches you depth. It slows you down enough to taste life instead of gulping it down. And in that depth, you discover a richness that no amount of busyness can offer. Solitude also changes the way you see relationships. When you are comfortable with yourself, you stop using others as a shield against emptiness. Instead, you meet them as whole individuals. Your connections become freer because they are not burdened with unspoken demands to fix your loneliness. Jung believed that true relationship can only happen between two whole selves, not between two halves seeking completion. This is another way solitude masters your time. It prevents you from wasting years in relationships that are built on fear of being alone. When you no longer fear solitude, you choose relationships for love, not for escape. And that choice saves immeasurable time and heartache. We should also reflect on how solitude interacts with creativity. Creativity is often misunderstood as something that happens in flashes of inspiration. But in truth, creativity requires space. The unconscious needs time to weave connections, to let images rise, to form patterns. Solitude provides that space. Jung himself experienced this in his own life. During his most creative periods, he withdrew into solitude, allowing the symbols of the unconscious to emerge without interference. He painted, built, carved, and wrote, not because he was following a schedule, but because solitude allowed his inner world to flow outward. To master your time means to give space for these flows, rather than filling every moment with noise. Without solitude, creativity suffocates. With it, creativity blossoms. Another gift of solitude is resilience. Life is unpredictable. Relationships shift, careers change, external circumstances cannot be controlled. If your sense of stability depends only on others, you will always be at risk of collapse. Solitude builds an inner anchor. It teaches you that you can survive the silence, that you can endure your own company, that you do not need constant reassurance to exist. This resilience saves time because it prevents the endless scrambling for external validation. You stop spending hours trying to prove yourself to others because you have already met yourself. Jung knew that the strongest people are not those who never feel fear, but those who have faced themselves in solitude and learned that they can endure. Think also of how solitude reframes success. In society, success is often defined by external markers, money, status, recognition. But solitude strips away the audience. When there is no one to impress, you are left with the question, what matters to me? Perhaps your idea of success is not what society dictates. Perhaps it is a quiet life, or a creative pursuit, or simply the freedom to spend your time as you wish. Solitude forces you to answer this question honestly, and once you do, you stop wasting time chasing someone else's idea of success. This is time mastery in its purest form, living according to your own definition of meaning. Solitude also cultivates patience. In the crowd, everything feels urgent. You are pressured to respond quickly, to keep up, to never fall behind. In solitude, the urgency fades. You begin to see that most things do not require immediate reaction. This patience changes your relationship with time. Instead of racing against it, you begin to flow with it. Jung emphasized the importance of this flow. He spoke of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that arise when you are attuned to the deeper rhythms of life. These synchronicities cannot be forced. They appear when you are aligned. Solitude nurtures this alignment, and with it, a sense of trust in the timing of life. This trust frees you from anxiety about the future and regret about the past. It anchors you in the present, where time is always mastered. There is also a humility in solitude. When you are alone, stripped of roles and applause, you realize how small you are in the vastness of existence. But this humility is not crushing. It is liberating. You see that you do not need to control everything, that much of life unfolds on its own. Jung observed that the unconscious holds wisdom that the conscious mind cannot grasp. Solitude teaches you to listen to that wisdom, to let go of the illusion of total control. This surrender saves time, because it prevents you from fighting battles you cannot win. Instead, you place your energy where it matters, where life is calling you. We should also consider the paradox that solitude, while seeming empty, actually deepens connection. When you learn to be alone, you become more capable of intimacy. Why? Because you are no longer afraid of loss. If you can stand on your own, you do not cling to others out of desperation. You love them freely, and you let them be. This freedom makes relationships richer and more authentic. It also saves time, because you no longer engage in endless games of manipulation, jealousy, or control. You relate honestly, and honesty is efficient. Jung believed that honesty with oneself is the foundation of honesty with others. Solitude builds that honesty, and with it, the quality of your relationships improves, even if their quantity decreases. At its deepest level, solitude transforms your sense of time itself. In the rush of daily life, time feels like an enemy, something that slips away, something you never have enough of. But in solitude, time feels different. It expands. A single hour can feel abundant, even infinite. Jung might say this is because solitude brings you into contact with the timeless dimensions of the psyche. Dreams, symbols, archetypes. These belong to a realm outside of ordinary clock time. When you enter that realm in solitude, you touch eternity, even if just for a moment. And when you return to ordinary life, you carry with you the sense that time is not just a resource to be managed, but a mystery to be experienced. This changes everything. As you move deeper into the practice of solitude, something subtle but profound begins to shift. You no longer see time as something to be conquered, but as something to be lived. To master your time does not mean to dominate it with strict control, but to align yourself with it, to enter into partnership with it. Jung's psychology points us again and again to this balance between the conscious and the unconscious, between the individual and the collective, between solitude and community. Mastery is not about eliminating one side, but about holding both. When you can hold solitude without fear, you step into this balance naturally. One of the greatest illusions of our age is that busyness equals importance. People fill their days with constant activity, thinking this is what gives their life meaning. Yet how often do they pause and ask whether all that activity is necessary? Solitude pierces through this illusion. When you are alone, when there is no one to impress, you discover that most of what fills our days is unnecessary. You realize that presence matters more than productivity, that meaning matters more than achievement, that depth matters more than speed. This realization frees you. It gives you permission to step off the treadmill of constant doing and instead devote your time to what truly nourishes your soul. Jung often spoke about the archetypal journey of the hero, the descent into the depths, the confrontation with darkness, the return with wisdom. Solitude is part of that descent. To be alone is to leave behind the familiar comforts of society and to face the mysteries of the inner world. It can feel like a death, a stripping away of roles and distractions, but it is also the path to rebirth. When you return from solitude, you return with clarity, with strength, with a deeper understanding of who you are. And once you have that understanding, you cannot waste time the way you once did. Your life becomes more deliberate, more authentic, more alive. The mastery of time that solitude brings is not just personal, it ripples outward. A person who has learned to be alone brings a different energy into the world. They are calmer, less reactive, more grounded. They do not spread their anxiety onto others because they have faced it within themselves. They do not demand constant attention because they are already whole. They respect their own time, and in doing so, they respect the time of others. Imagine how different relationships, communities, even societies could be if more people cultivated this kind of solitude. Instead of frantic rushing, there would be depth. Instead of endless distraction, there would be presence. Instead of constant noise, there would be room for silence, reflection, and meaning. It is also worth remembering that solitude is not about withdrawing forever. Jung would remind us that the goal of individuation is not isolation, but integration. The purpose of solitude is to meet yourself so that you can return to the world more fully. When you are alone, you collect your scattered pieces. When you return, you bring wholeness with you. This rhythm of retreat and return is essential. Too much solitude without return can lead to isolation. Too much social life without solitude can lead to emptiness. But when the two are balanced, your time is mastered because it is lived in harmony with the inner and outer worlds. At times, you may still resist solitude. You may feel the old fear of silence creeping in, the urge to distract yourself, the discomfort of facing what lies within. But remember, the very discomfort you feel is the sign that you are touching something real. Growth does not happen in comfort zones. Jung once said, "Loneliness is the way by which destiny endeavors to lead man to himself." To be led to yourself is the ultimate gift, and solitude is the path. If you can embrace it, even imperfectly, you will discover that the time you once thought was empty is in fact the richest time of all. In solitude, you also begin to see that mastery of time is not about how long you live, but how deeply. There are those who live 80 years but never touch their own soul, and there are those who, through solitude and reflection, live a single year with more meaning than most do in a lifetime. Jung's psychology reminds us that the depth of experience matters more than its duration. Solitude deepens experience. It slows you down enough to savor, to listen, to see. It teaches you to be present, and presence is the true measure of time well lived. And so we arrive at the heart of the matter. When you learn to be alone, you do not simply fill time, you transform it. You stop treating time as a burden and start seeing it as a gift. You stop running from silence and start listening to its wisdom. You stop scattering your energy in endless external pursuits and start aligning with your inner compass. This alignment changes everything: your relationships, your work, your creativity, your peace. It is not easy, but it is simple. Sit with yourself. Stay in the silence. Let solitude teach you who you are. From there, mastery of time follows naturally, because your time becomes your own. As you walk away from this reflection, remember that solitude is not something to fear, but something to cultivate. Start small. A few minutes each day without distraction. A quiet walk, a moment of stillness, a pause before rushing into the next task. In these moments, you are reclaiming your time, one breath at a time. You are training yourself to be at home with your own soul. You are stepping into the mastery that Jung spoke of, the mastery that comes not from controlling life, but from aligning with it. And when you do, you discover that time is not your enemy. It is your companion. It flows with you, not against you. And in that flow, life becomes not just longer, but deeper, fuller, and more real. So, when you learn to be alone, you master your time. You master it not by squeezing more hours into a day, not by conquering it with endless effort, but by living it authentically. You master it by facing yourself, by embracing your shadow, by listening to your inner voice, by aligning with what matters. Jung knew that solitude is not emptiness. It is the birthplace of the self. And once you have found yourself there, you carry that self into the world, making every moment count. This is the true mastery of time, and it begins the moment you dare to sit alone and discover that you are already complete.